Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chaz Kayato, and as you can see, I'm sitting down again, so it's time for another one of those fireside chats. I have my microphone on that I may have forgotten to charge, so let's hope it stays with us the whole time. So, as I've mentioned before, these sit downs, they're just a little bit more informal, but they're also a little bit longer, and I want to go in depth a little bit more than I normally would about a specific topic. So, today's topic that we're going to talk about is what is school for? It's kind of an interesting question. And so, I will also point out that a lot of the different things that I talk about, whether they be the sit down talks or just some of the normal educational videos, there's a lot of information that overlaps, and that's because we're talking about a very specific topic, right? Education, and so it just is the nature that we will say things, or I will say things that I've mentioned in other videos, and we're just building on the knowledge of the specific topics that we are talking about. So, anyways, to start, let me just double check. Okay, we're still good. All right, so what is school for us? This is kind of an interesting question in the sense that you probably think the answer to that question is very obvious, and the reality of it is that most people don't agree. And so this goes back to something I was listening to a couple years ago. It was professional development video I was watching, or seminar, or something to that effect, where there was a discussion at a university between professors on defining. Well, actually, let me backtrack. Um, the discussion that the professors were having were they were essentially laying an outline for what they wanted to do with the university for the future, the next few years, whatnot. And they wanted to find common grounds in order to move forward. And so the thing that they wanted to find the common ground with was essentially defining what education was for. What is the purpose of going to college? And they actually couldn't get past that. They couldn't come to an agreement. And these are college professors that they've invested a lot of time into academia, and they couldn't even define what college was for. And so, we're just talking about just generally what is school for, what is education for. And so, recently there was research that was done by the NEA, where they asked, essentially, they asked this question: what do you believe school should be for? And I believe this was to teachers. I'm sorry, I believe this was to parents of students in a public education system, and 45% of the respondents said the goal was to prepare them for further level of academics. And I'm going to come back to all these in a bit. 25% was to prepare the student for the workforce. 26% said they wanted, or they believed that the purpose of school was to create a good citizen. And then there was just the 4% that said they weren't sure. So, 1 out of 20 people don't really know why they're sending their child to school. Um, and there was another study, or another survey that was done, that essentially asked a number of different questions. And it did point out that 67% of parents thought that there was too much emphasis on standardized testing. And this is in public education, right? I don't know what school district it was, or if it was just across the United States, but those are some interesting answers. Mainly, there's no consensus on why parents believe they are sending their child to school. And I believe you could probably also get some people, if there were more responses, probably would say, well, because I need to go to work during the day and I need my child to be somewhere, right? So so that's just it brings this point that is worth exploring, that we don't exactly know why we educate our students. Now, there could be, and what it's most likely is that it's just a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of these, it's probably all of them. But, you could break it further down and say, well, to what extent should it be X, Y, or Z? And then, how do we present that information? How does it come across to the students? Because as someone who has taught um, grades all from seventh all the way to 12th, there's a lot of students that are in the classroom and they are just confused about what they're doing there in many different ways. So I believe that if we could help answer these questions for the students, and even for the parents and even for ourselves, maybe it would give us a better, a clearer picture of what we're doing. So can we, build the gap between, what or where we are and, where we want to be in terms of explaining and understanding what we're doing with our educational system. So I want to point out, let me talk about good citizenship first. So that was kind of an interesting response to see a fourth of parents thought that the school system was to prepare them to be a good citizen. Now, my question would be for that is, well, what defines a good citizen? What are the qualities of a good citizen? Um, and I think that even that, if you really broke it down further, would be something that parents wouldn't agree on, people wouldn't agree on. I think that what makes someone a good citizen is probably, uh, a foundational topic as it relates to politics. And we just live in a country and a world where politics are very fragmented. So you'd imagine that if if having a student be a good citizen is the primary goal, then you really have to ask, well, what is the definition of a good citizen, and who's responsible for defining what a good citizen is? And is that going to change with every different president that we may have in office, every different governor that we may have in office? How often would that definition change? So that was, I wanted to talk about that one first because that one is the most difficult to define, and I think that that one could, you could have a bunch of different philosophical conversations about that one. And it's just something that we just need to put in the back of our mind. Obviously, one fourth of parents think that that should be the primary goal of education. And I know, at least me personally, I don't know exactly what that means. So maybe if that many people believe that it's the goal and we can't really pin it down, we probably need to spend some more time thinking about what that means. So, okay, moving on to the next one. Prepare students for academics. Well, I thought that was a little bit of a, I didn't like that response. 45% of parents put that as their response to prepare for academics. And the reason I didn't like that was because academics is not indefinite. We are going to, uh, we're going to at some point finish teaching a child. Now, this has nothing to do with long term, self enrichment, and we're talking about the normal way we consider the educational system in the United States, which we're talking about K through 12, and then also we're working in college education in there as well. So if our only goal is to get the student to the next level. Well, okay, that's great, but that ends eventually, and what do you do afterwards? But then that also seems like, well, isn't that spending a lot of time and money and resources into something that is its own goal? The goal of education is to get more education, and it seems like that's a really difficult. I didn't love that answer either, just because if it's just to prepare you for the next academic level, well, why are we so set on, um, certain things being, oh, this is what you do at this academic level? If it's all just no, it just matters that you get to the next level. And that also brings up another topic, which we're not going to get into today. But I know that anecdotally, speaking to some teachers from different places around the country, um, first thing, there's different requirements in order to get to the next level. There are some school districts that may have the mentality of, we need to get as many kids to the next level as possible by whatever means. And so you have to ask questions such as, well, are we sending kids forward that don't need to be forward going forward if you have that mentality? And so I think that if if the goal of education is just to progress in education, what does that do? And so one thing that I've always heard, and I still hear, is that we need to have our students be well-rounded. And so that's also something that's really nice to say. It's really great to say, well, we have a well-rounded education. But, how do you define well-rounded, and who defines well-rounded, and can well-rounded change over time? And then, is this even something that can coexist with the other elements we talked about, which is the good citizenship, and preparing for work. So um, if we're just preparing to get to the next level, does that have any overlap with becoming a good citizen? Does that have any overlap with being prepared for work? And the scary thing is that was 45% of the responses said that it's just to get you to the next level, which is education a video game? Are we just trying to get to the max level and then move on? But the reality of it is, you can't go to school indefinitely, right? Even if you really wanted to, you could probably go for a couple decades, and you'd be a doctor at the end. But it would still end at some point, and you would still have to go, and you would still have to get a job. So, that goes to the 26% of respondents that said the students need to be prepared they need to be prepared for work. And so, um, this is the most practical response, in the sense that it is trying to prepare you for. You're essentially saying, okay, well, look, we're gonna teach you during your formative years to do certain tasks, and then, especially if it's a type of educational program where you're learning, maybe like an apprenticeship or something like that. Maybe you're learning specific skills for a specific industry, but the goal is to get you to the point where you graduate high school, and then you are ready, or you graduate college and you are ready to go to a specific industry and do a specific job. And um, and so it does have a very specific end goal, though. It's very well defined. It says, we're trying to get you prepared for a job, and then depending on which program you choose, it will, you know, that will be the job industry that you will go into. And so now that was basically a fourth of responses were preparation for jobs. So just to reiterate, about a fourth of parents thought that the education was to prepare students for work. About a fourth thought that it was to create a good citizen, and about half a little less than half thought it was the job of education was to prepare you for more education, essentially. So, we need to take that into account. Um, and I think as educators, as people involved in bringing young students, preparing them for adult life, we need to ask ourselves, what am I preparing them for? And kind of have those conversations, because once again, the students don't really know what they're going to school for. Now, granted, you have some that will say, look, I'm going to school because I need to get into this med school because I want to be a doctor, or I want to get into this law school, or I want to do this specific thing. You do have students that are like that. So it's not a blanket statement that all students are lost. But I do think that there are a significant amount that don't understand what life is going to be like once they are done with school and aren't really sure how school factors into that. They can't understand how a majority of their classes are going to translate into any specific job skill. And I don't think we do a great job of providing, um, you know, explaining that to kids. And to be fair, the world is a lot different than it was when we were in high school and college and grade school and whatnot. So things have changed, and so some things that have changed, and that's kind of the second part of this video is I wanted to introduce the idea of not knowing what the purpose of education was for, but then also talking about the changing statistics that we have in the field of education right now. And those are things that we need to think about as we address what is education for. So, we have a disillusioned number of students that are ever increasing. So I've mentioned the demographic cliff before. If you're not familiar with the demographic cliff, it's that we have less 18-year-olds now than we did 15, 20 years ago. And why is that important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. One is um, you have you have a generation, the baby boomers. Many of them are retiring, or they are retired. They're going to retire, retiring now, and so we have less people entering the workforce to take over for this large group of people who are retiring. And so, therefore, you might imagine that, oh, well, what that means is it's going to create a lot of jobs. There's a lot of people retiring, a lot of jobs will be created. And so, if you're coming out of high school, you're coming out of college, you should have no problem getting a job because we're going to see that's not necessarily the case. And because let's move on. So you have less 18-year-olds. So in 2010, there was roughly, and I got a few different statistics. Most of the statistics showed that about 21 million college students were in the United States in 2010. 21 million. Now, fast forward to 2026, different statistics, but somewhere between 17 to 19% um, was the number I was given. 17. I'm sorry, that's 17 to 19 million students, um, college students in 2026. That's a big drop. At least 2 million, but maybe as high as 4 million. And so we have roughly 15%, or I'm sorry, 15% less babies are being born now than in 20, or I'm sorry, 2007. So so that's part of the demographic cliff. But there may be, especially if we're looking at if it's 17 million and not 19 million, you're looking at not only are you having less students, less children being born, but you're also having a significant number of students that are getting to that 18-year-old mark or they're getting to that college graduate or high school graduate mark, and they're deciding that college isn't for them. And so this has put a strain on it's put a strain on the college education system. Over 50 colleges have folded in the past 6 years since COVID. COVID kind of exacerbated a lot of the issues that we're having. We've had runaway inflation. Um, it's matter of fact. Now this is going all the way back to the year 2000, but um, since the year 2000, tuition has doubled the pace of inflation, doubled. So so you have to ask yourself, what is the value of a college degree if it's going to cost me more to get it and I have to go into debt? So let's go back to some of the other things that we were talking about with jobs, right? I mentioned that, well, yeah, if you have all these people retiring, we should have more jobs, right? But that's not necessarily the case. And we need to be careful about reading into job reports because job reports are almost always later changed and reduced. So, you get a job report, oh wow, that's actually a pretty good amount. And then later on, those numbers are revised downward, and this doesn't have anything to do with any one particular president. This is just generally how it works. Um, Jobs reports are almost always, no matter who's in charge, reduced at a later time. Um, but something that we're seeing now, which is a more newer phenomenon, is what's known as ghost jobs. So, what is a ghost job? Well, a ghost job is a job that is posted, but the company that posts the job really has no intentions of hiring for that position. Um, so essentially, it's a posting that makes it look like a job is available, but it's really not. And so I don't know fully. There's probably many reasons for that to happen. I do know that I was talking to a principal last week who had mentioned that many of the job postings for her district were actually already filled, but legally they had to post the job. So maybe not filled per se, but the candidate that was going to end up getting the job was pretty much already 1 foot in the door, but they had to post the job and go through the normal processes to um, to do the hiring process. But that job really, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist. So you're seeing these ghost jobs. 1 in 3 jobs, according to HR Drive, are ghost jobs, which means they're there. People are saying, people are applying for them, but in reality, they don't exist. Um, and so now, couple this with what about the future? So if we know that maybe 1 in 3 jobs that are out there right now aren't real, and we know that there is a big technological boom that is affecting the workplace. Well, what about the future? So not just now, but what about the future too? So also according to K12.com, 32% of teens feel unprepared for the workforce. So if they feel unprepared for the workforce now, basically 1 in 3, how's it going to be in the future where the amount of entry level jobs are going to be significantly different? And so let me also define entry level jobs because I think that's really important. Well, you have two mentalities for entry level jobs. Entry level jobs, on one hand, some people might consider entry level jobs to be just any job that a teenager can get without a high school degree. So, you're talking about food service jobs, things like that. And then you also have the idea that, well, no, entry level job means a job that's your first step towards a career, and that would be the entry level jobs. So either way, you're talking about a significant shift for really both of these groups. So a recent study showed that 80% of restaurant jobs could be automated in the near future. And so, uh, if you have more automation in that sense, in a career that many teenagers often go work in in food service jobs because their labor is less expensive, and so and it's also you know there's many there's if you lose a teenager from a HR standpoint, it's kind of the expectation, right? You're not retaining teenagers for a long time in those jobs, so kind of is the expectation that they're going to come and go pretty quickly. Um, but okay, you've seen it at different fast food restaurants. You don't have people taking orders anymore. You have kiosks, right? Well, same thing with when you go through the drive-through. Generally, it's a voice that's going, an automated voice that's going to interact with you, and really, only comes on if for some reason that interaction needs someone to step in. But we're also seeing other things, just manual tasks, menial tasks being automated. But if 80% of those types of jobs are replaced, once again, that reduces the amount of jobs that teenagers can get. But then just the other entry level jobs. So many of those jobs um, also revolve around, uh, and I don't want to say this as a blanket statement at all of these, but many of them deal with just very basic, uh, maybe it might be data entry or something like that, things that can be easily replaced by technology, and that is going to affect the number of entry level jobs that people have access to, because um, entry level jobs are still a real cost to a business. And so if you are if you cost money to a business, then they're going to look at potential alternatives, and potential alternatives being, well, can I just have a computer software program do what this person does, and if I do that, is it going to save my business money? So essentially, there is a significant amount of people that are and young people that are kind of disillusioned with the hiring process. They don't believe they have the skills that they need, um, and so we're sending kids off out of high school um, without a clear pathway to anything. They don't know why they were in school. So even if they go to college, you're not talking about a ton of kids who have a definitive, like, all right, I'm going to college because I'm gonna have this XYZ career path. And you do have some. We're not saying that those don't exist. There are some that exist, but overall, there's a lot that just still really don't know what the point of college is. They just know that they were told that they need to go there in order to get a job. But that veneer is being stripped away because there's more and more students that are saying, well, it's really not worth it. It costs a lot of money, and the job prospects really aren't great anyways. So I don't really see a point in going to college. So this is something that colleges are dealing with. Uh, you know, they're trying to scale back that increase in the cost of college because of how much it has outpaced inflation. They're trying to find ways to bring in older students to offset the loss of younger students. So there's definitely been some reactions in for college education to try to fix this demographic cliff. But I still think that we haven't necessarily addressed, well, what is the point of college? And so that's something that we need to figure out. Because if we can't give those students a good response when they ask me, why do I need to know this? Then, then they're not going to want to do it. And I think that the students also are at a point where they don't want to hear a cliche response, something like, well, because you need to get a good job, because they can look to their friends that may have had better grades than them, and they may be struggling to get a job, and they may say, well, I don't believe that that's necessarily true. So you can only go so far with some of the responses that we got as students, and that dynamic, that the way the way that world worked back 20, 30 years ago, maybe that was still the case. Like, people still thought that you needed to go to college, and that having that degree was really important. But it's just a lot different now. And I think that the value of having that degree is perceived less than it was a couple decades ago. And so, what are we doing in terms of preparing these students for adult life, and what is the lens that we are educating them in? Are we just saying, well, the point of education is to prepare you for academics, so my job is just to get you from 10th grade to 11th grade? Or are we saying, well, my job is to get you to be a good citizen, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you a good citizen. But you know what exactly does a good citizen mean? And then you do have that, those that believe that the point of the point of school is to prepare you for work. And so, if that's the case, maybe we also need to look at, well, what does it mean to prepare someone for work? Um, do we need to have more hands-on classes? Do we need to have classes that teach you, um, you know, what it takes to be successful in a workplace? Or, those are really the things that we need to address, because it may come at the cost of, well, they can only take so many classes a year. So if we add in, these enrichment classes, we have to take away, some of these other classes. And those are all questions that we need to address. But I wasn't trying to answer any questions today per se, or give you definitive responses. The goal today was just to bring attention to this issue, that we as a society, as educators, as parents, as just people, in America, we actually don't really know what is the point of education. We have a few things that we can. I mean, obviously, you want to. You know, I've mentioned this before, that my personal opinion is that it is, uh, education for education's sake has value. So I'm not trying to poo-poo, getting a college degree or anything like that, because I've obviously pursued a doctorate degree, and I didn't need to get one, but the challenge was worth it, and my desire to become more educated was the reason I did that. But we do need to answer these questions, not just so that way we can tell a student, if they ask us, what's the point, but also so we can have a specific pathway to get the students from point A to point B, with some clarity, and to give them confidence. Because right now, student confidence is low. They don't know what to expect. The world is changing very fast around them, and no one has any clear or definitive answers. And maybe we won't have any clear or definitive answers, but at least the process of trying to discover some clear and definitive answers will help these students uh, get to be, good citizens, and strong in the workforce and whatnot. So, all right, well, that's all I wanted to talk about today with that chat. So, thank you for listening if you stayed the whole time, and have a good day.